Welcome back to Solo Adventures! My name is Livy, and today the video I'm going to be making is a little bit more personal than usual. So I thought it would be fun to take a little look back in time and talk about the book that got me into the whole idea of interactive fiction and thus gaming by myself as a hobby. So I was maybe 6, 7, or maybe 8 years old. I'm gonna guess I was probably 7. This was before I discovered Harry Potter. I'm not really sure if they had been published in the US yet, and so I hadn't really had a lot of exposure to fantasy. But in any case, I loved books and I read all the time. It was my favorite pastime. So one summer, I was going to spend a couple of weeks with my grandma. And my grandma lived up in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the wilderness, pretty far away from any public library. So the way that she got her books was through kind of a catalog mail order type of service, where you could just fill in a little order form and you could borrow library books and then send them back. So since I was going to be spending a couple weeks with her, we thought it would be a good idea to check out a bunch of books for me to keep me busy. So I remember going through this catalog, looking at books that I wanted to check out, and checking off quite a few that looked pretty interesting, but there was one in particular that caught my attention because even though the synopsis of this book was extremely short, maybe it was just a couple sentences, it seemed to be that this book was written about me. It said, "You are the hero." And I was immediately intrigued by this because I had never seen a book like this before, and I wondered how this could possibly be. So in any case, I ordered it, and when I went to spend time with my grandma, I had this big stack of library books that I could read, but there was one in particular that I was really excited for. So when I was about 6 or 7, I was a pretty advanced reader, but even so, the books that I read were not that mature. Like, I read books that were made for older children, and a lot of Little House on the Prairie, and The Swiss Family Robinson, and things like that in general. I only had access to books that were at my elementary school library at the time. I hadn't gone to the public library in my hometown yet, so I hadn't really been exposed to a lot of books with darker or more edgy topics. And so when I had this book in my hands, I was instantly just drawn in by just the creepiness of the image on the cover. There was a knight in black armor riding on a black horse, also wearing black armor, and this knight had glowing red eyes, and in the background there's a creepy wizard with some kind of green lightning, and I was kind of freaked out, but honestly super excited. So I started reading this book and I could not put it down. I was really surprised to discover after a couple of pages that it would ask me to make a decision, and if I would, for example, go left, I would go to page 29. If I go right, I go to page 42, and on like this. So this was just a basic choose your own adventure type of book. It didn't really have any game mechanics, but even so, it blew my mind. And even more so, it was creepy, it was violent, there was the undead in it, and I remember it was giving me so many crazy nightmares and weird fantasies during the day. I had such a good time with this book. It took me a long time before I reached the true ending where I felt like I had won, but even after that I kept reading it over and over and experiencing where all of the different paths led. So needless to say, I was in love with this book. The only problem is that I forgot the name of it. When this book had to go back to the library, I never saw it again. And I remember trying to find it at other libraries. I begged my mom to go to the public library and we tried to search for it there. But I couldn't find it. It had a very generic title like Night of Darkness or Forest of Darkness or Dungeon of Night or something like that, and I just couldn't find it. However, what I did find was other choose your own adventure style books, and the Give Yourself Goosebumps series, which was also really creepy and really cool for me. So even though I didn't find my one long lost love, I did get into a bunch of other interactive fiction for children, at least at the time. So going forward, I read a whole bunch of these books. All of the Choose Your Own Adventure books, basically, all of the Give Yourself Goosebumps books, anything I could really get my hands on that were at my school or local library. And as I got a little bit older, I discovered interactive fiction on the internet. I think this website is still running. It's called chooseyourstory.com. But basically it was a website that provided tools to make your own interactive fiction type adventures. And I was so hooked, making and reading other people's interactive stories. Now, I was quite young at the time, and my writing wasn't very good, and so if my stories still exist somewhere on that website, they're probably really cringeworthy. So as I grew older, I discovered like Lone Wolf and Fighting Fantasy and all of these really wonderful books, but I never could find my first love. I had been looking for it for quite a long time, and it was really only earlier this year that I finally found it 20 years after I first read it. And this book is Dungeon of Fear by Michael Andrews. And when I first saw this cover, I was immediately struck with just a feeling of, oh my god, this is it. I wasn't 100% sure though, because the cover was a bit sketchy in my memory, but I knew that if I bought it, there would be a passage that I would remember, because it gave me the total creeps back in the day. And yeah, I found the passage. This is the book. This is my very first game book, and I wanted to talk about it today. So before I go into the actual story and writing of this book, I thought we could take a little closer look at the cover and the pictures inside. So yes, let's go do that. This particular copy is in pretty good shape, except for this little bend on the cover, but otherwise it looks pretty much brand new. This book was published in 1994. So yeah, nothing too spectacular, your pretty standard sword and sorcery sort of artwork. Only your choices can help save you from the Dungeon of Fear. Just page through it a little bit. I'm going to be careful to not open it too far because, as you can see, the spine is still pretty pristine and I don't want to break it, but I'll just take a quick page through. And there we are. This is the player character. Yeah, nothing too special. Pretty standard fantasy guy, I guess. Something I'm not really a fan of is that there's not that many pieces of artwork in this book, and what there is of it isn't too impressive. I think this is probably the best piece in this book. But yeah, nothing approaching fighting fantasy levels of quality here. Oh, that's kind of cool. The Red Room Inn. I remember this very, very well. This is a mansion basically that you can explore, but it's not as adventurous as it looks. It's actually pretty linear. Most of these rooms don't really have anything in there. I think there's only one room where there's anything important. I don't know what this tiny dragon is doing up here. This guy's kind of cool. He's supposed to be a wizard, but he definitely looks like he's undead. And here's our nemesis, Lord Fear, with his silly hat and everything. Like, just look at that hat. It's got a little crown and wings on it. Definitely evil, though. So I guess we have to take him out. And here's Keela, our companion, frequently referred to as the female thief. As you can see, she fights with a whip. It's very Castlevania. And that's about it. So yeah, this book has 184 pages, which I guess isn't terrible, but what is not great is there are only 74 entries. Like, look at that. That is not very much. As you can see, there's not really a ton of choice here. There's just a lot of really long passages where you keep on reading. Not the best. But yeah, I was totally in love with this book as a child. This was the best book ever. And even though looking at it now, it's not so great, I can definitely still feel that warm and fuzzy nostalgia when I look at this. So Endless Quest books can be quite expensive. I didn't pay that much for this one. I was lucky to find it for about 10 euro. But it's not uncommon for these to go up into like $50, $60 each. Unless you have crazy nostalgia for this book like I do, definitely do not pay more than maybe $5 or $6 for one of these. I don't think that the quality of these is probably all that good throughout the whole series. But yeah, definitely good for a little bit of nostalgia. So in any case, let's talk about this. So as you can see, there's nothing really too exciting or different about this book. In fact, pretty much everything about it, especially its art, is extremely generic. That was okay for me at the time though, because this was my first real fantasy book at the time. I had read The Hobbit, but I hadn't really been exposed to the whole sword and sorcery sort of genre, so this was something completely new to me. As you could see, the art on the inside isn't particularly interesting. It's pretty generic. The title of this book is pretty generic. I mean, Dungeon of Fear. It's really no wonder why it took me so long to find this, because this is just probably one of the most boring names for a fantasy book ever. The story of this book is really nothing special. You are a rogue type character who self-identifies as a thief, and you are tasked with recovering a treasure for a king so that he will pardon you for your previous crimes against the crown. Of course, seeing as how this is an Endless Quest book that is based on Dragon Strike, which was a board game that was based on Dungeons and Dragons, you are not on your quest alone. You, of course, have companions. And in this case, you have a warrior named Dare and a fellow thief named Keela. So you and your companions go on a quest to track down Lord Fear, really imaginative name for a villain, and find this crystal skull. While I was totally in love with this book as a kid, going back to read it now as an adult, I realized that this is probably one of the worst game books that I've ever read. Going beyond just the pure genericness of it all, your choices are really not very meaningful in this book. It's pretty linear, and if you choose the wrong choice, you pretty much instantly die. There's really only one way to the true ending. In addition, there can be several pages that you go without even making a decision. The story is pretty boring, the writing is pretty bland, it's nothing really special. But I do want to read a passage that I thought was so scary as a child and gave me nightmares for weeks after. And this was the passage that allowed me to positively identify that I actually got the right book. So at this point in the story, you, Shadow, which I guess is your nickname, you are a thief, is brought to the dungeons because of some misunderstanding with the king. The guard opens another heavy wooden portal and pushes you into a long, dim corridor with doors on each side. From behind the doors come cries of, "Help me!" and "I didn't do anything!" "Everybody's innocent in the king's dungeon," your guard says, laughing. From behind the doors you hear sad weeping, sometimes moaning. Someone pounds on the inside of a door. "Let me out of here!" the prisoner yells. Laughter comes from another cell, the mad, gibbering laughter of the hopelessly insane. "Make yourself comfortable, Shadow. You're going to be here for a long time. But don't worry, we won't forget you, like some of the others. The prisoner who had laughed suddenly breaks out into a rambling drinking song and raises a high note into a piercing, insane scream. The guard smiles. The king will get to you eventually, thief. You'll be tried and then you'll hang from the gallows for your crimes, he shrugs. But enjoy your stay. It could be worse, he says. At least you have company. You scream in terror as you spy your cellmates. The rat is fat and ugly, watching you as it sits atop the gnawed skull of a skeleton shackled to the wall, a long-forgotten prisoner in the king's chamber of horrors. As the guard's footsteps disappear into the distance, you realize that the dead and the insane are your only friends down here in the dungeon of the forgotten, and that this prisoner's fate will turn out to be your own. And it slowly dawns on you that you will probably never see the light of day again in your lifetime. And you laugh. You laugh and laugh until your throat is raw and the echoes ring loudly in your ears. The end. So, I know this seems probably pretty tame, but for me, this was absolutely nightmare-inducing, and so it was really a thrill at the time. So, the characters in this story are pretty generic, like there's really nothing out of the ordinary, but something that I do find kind of interesting looking back now is the way that the characters talk about being thieves or warriors or clerics. Now this book is of course based on like tabletop role-playing games, which of course have different classes that you can play as, like warrior, wizard, cleric, or in the case of old school D&D, thief. But it's generally understood that the people who live in this world of D&D don't actively identify themselves as having a class. Like, there's nobody who's going to say that, oh yes, I'm a thief, or I'm a barbarian, I'm a cleric, just like we don't do that in real life. But in this book, the people totally do that, and it's weird. And the book tells you straight up what a thief is in this world. In your society, a thief is not always considered to be all that bad. And unlike a lot of thieves, you steal for a much more important reason than simply desiring an object. You steal only to provide those who have nothing with the simple comforts everyone deserves. As much as you hate to admit it, you cannot allow yourself to make a profit off the things you steal. They must always go to the benefit of the greater good. So yeah, that doesn't really sound like a lot of rogues that I'm used to in D&D, but I guess since this is a role-playing game and in general the author wants you to feel heroic, then you are a thief, but an honorable one, a Robin Hood sort. I just love it how in this book it says in your society thieves aren't considered to be all that bad. Okay, so you're joined in your quest by a fellow thief whose name is Keela, and this book constantly refers to her as the female thief, which I find interesting. Your other companion is a warrior, and the book constantly refers to him as the warrior, as in the warrior opens the wooden door, the warrior glares, things like that. And then in the case of your companion, it's almost always the female thief creeps on ahead, or the female thief looks concerned. It's like, we get it, she's a lady and a thief. So at this point you're investigating a fireplace that is kind of suspicious. You think that maybe there's a hidden passageway behind it. So you're looking into the fireplace and looking for a trap door or something. And the book says, Keela bends down and looks inside with you. What do you think, she says. I don't know, yet, but I've got that feeling, you divulge to her. You know, the one thieves get when they're onto something big. You know, that one feeling that all thieves get when they're onto something big. Because we're thieves and we all are the same, and we all naturally understand what this means. There's a point in this book where Keela and you, the main character, are basically talking about how, isn't it so great that you, being thieves, are so quick and cunning and stealthy, when warriors are all boneheaded and just stupid lunks who carry around broadswords. And at another point in this book, the warrior character is suspicious of magic. And the book just flat out says something like, and being a warrior, who were as a rule suspicious of magic. So yeah, the most generic book with the most literally generic typecast kind of characters. So something that I learned when I was doing research for this review is that this book is based on the board game Dragon Strike, which is based on Dungeons and Dragons. And if you go looking around on YouTube, you can find videos of this board game. There was this crazy videotape that would go along with it, and it showed kind of an example of what a Dragon Strike adventure would be kind of like. The characters in this book look a lot like the characters from this videotape, so in fact I think they are supposed to be the same people. There's a point in here when there's a reference to the Sunstone of Tarakas, and that is the evil wizard that is also in that VHS. So if you want a good laugh, I'll provide a link to this videotape in the comments below. You might get a kick out of it. And watching this video will probably give you a very good feeling of what reading this book is like, because in all honesty, they are really both equally cheesy. So despite the fact that this book is really not very good as a book or as a game book or a choose your own adventure sort of book, I can't help but love this book, and I admit that it is nothing but pure nostalgia. And I'm just really happy that I finally found it again after all of these years. So now that you know how I got into this hobby, I'm curious about you. So please write down in the comments what your first experience with solo gaming was. Was it a game book or choose your own adventure style book like me? Or maybe it was one of those old solo Tunnels and Trolls sort of adventures or something else? I don't know, but I would really like to find out. Thank you so much for watching. If you like what I do here, then please subscribe so you won't miss any of my videos. I want to give a special thanks to my patrons, and especially my heroic patron, Joshua Jumbles. So until next time, friends, stay adventurous.